Welcome to NTD News. I'm Jasmina Davis. Here are today's top stories. President Trump defended his many in-person rallies in recent months, saying he has to go out and meet people. He said he's president and can't lead the country from a basement. The anonymous author of a New York Times op-ed and book has revealed his identity. He wrote a scathing article about President Trump in 2018. The former White House staffer had denied he was the author on television earlier this year. And a real-life mystery. A journalist says a collection of confidential documents related to the Biden family have disappeared. He says they're directly relevant to the presidential campaign. The fatal police shooting of Walter Wallace has ignited another series of protests in the U.S., including in Brooklyn, New York. Protesters marched in the streets, but there are also reports of people looting buildings. Hurricane Zeta has lessened to a tropical storm after making landfall along the Gulf Coast. It's the third hurricane to hit the Gulf Coast this year. President Trump defended his large-scale outdoor in-person rallies, saying he has to go out and meet people. He received praise from prominent supporters during a rally outside Phoenix, Arizona, including British politician Nigel Farage.
President Trump at an outdoor rally speaking to a large crowd in Goodyear, Arizona. It's his chosen format for campaigning in recent months, despite the ongoing pandemic.
I'd like to be in a basement. I'd like to be in someplace. I'd like to be in a beautiful bedroom, nice for a year and a half, 2 years, never come out in the White House. But I'm your president. I have to come out. I have to meet people.
He contrasted his approach to that of rival Joe Biden.
If you vote for Biden, it means no kids in school, no graduations, no weddings, no Thanksgiving, no Christmas, and no 4th of July together. Other than that, you have a wonderful life. Can't see anybody, but that's all right. You have a wonderful life.
The pandemic has upended life across the United States this year. The president praised Arizona Governor Doug Ducey for his decision to open up businesses. That's after the state became a national hotspot for the CCP virus in June and early July. President Trump called up a number of speakers to the stage during the rally. One was British politician Nigel Farage. The president called him one of the most powerful men in Europe. Farage spearheaded a campaign that helped to lead Britain to exit the European Union.
This is the single most resilient and bravest person I have ever met in my life.
Farage praised President Trump's role in a historic peace deal between Israel and the UAE and more.
To fight for patriotism, to fight against globalism. You'll be voting for the only leader in the Western world with the real courage to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party.
Other prominent supporters who spoke included Kentucky Senator Rand Paul and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy speaking about an assumed re-election of the president.
We're going to have a House that defends them. It stands for America. And when that day comes, I want you all to come to the swearing in.
There are currently 232 Democrats in the House of Representatives and 197 Republicans. If Republicans gain a net of at least 18 seats, McCarthy would become the Speaker of the House. McCarthy said he wanted the crowd to watch House Speaker Nancy Pelosi hand him the gavel.
And I promise you this, I won't bang her with it, but I'll bang the end to the socialism and yes to America.
According to his campaign, the president is visiting 10 states across the final week of the campaign trail.
And we will make America great again. Thank you very much. Thank you, Arizona. Go out and vote. Thank you.
And he's set to host 11 rallies in the final 48 hours before the November 3rd election.
The anonymous author of a New York Times article published in September 2018 has come out. The former White House staffer was fired that same year after a brief period as DHS Chief of Staff. His writings criticized the president.
The author of a New York Times op-ed and book who was known as Anonymous has revealed himself. He was critical of President Trump's administration following a short time as the Department of Homeland Security's chief of staff in 2018. The anonymous source, Miles Taylor, now works as a CNN contributor. The White House has described Taylor as a low-level, disgruntled former staffer. The New York Times article gave the impression that Taylor was a higher-level employee inside the White House. In August, Taylor was asked on CNN if he knew the author, which he denied.
I'm not. Look, and that was a parlor game that happened in Washington, D.C. of a lot of folks trying to think of who that might be. I've got my own thoughts about who that might be, but...
Then he was asked directly by Anderson Cooper if it was him that wrote the op-ed.
I wear a mask for two things, Anderson, Halloweens and pandemics, so no.
Taylor came under fire earlier this year while still anonymous when his book was announced and critics questioned why he insisted on staying anonymous. This while other government officials went on the record to testify during the impeachment inquiry against Trump in 2019. Taylor wrote on Medium.com that it wasn't an easy decision to publish his writings anonymously, but he stands by it. The White House press secretary's office responded, calling the behavior cowardly. Taylor in August also publicly endorsed Democratic nominee Joe Biden in a video funded by Republican voters against Trump.
It sounds like a mystery from the big screen. Confidential documents relevant to an important election day just days away go missing overnight. But Fox News host Tucker Carlson says it isn't fiction. It really happened.
Fox News host Tucker Carlson says confidential documents related to the Biden family vanished from an envelope overnight. A source allegedly gave his team the documents on Monday. Carlson was on the West Coast at the time, filming an interview with Tony Bobulinski, Hunter Biden's former business partner. Carlson said a producer shipped the documents to California overnight using a large national carrier.
But the Biden documents never arrived in Los Angeles. Tuesday morning, we received word from the shipping company that our package had been opened and the contents were missing. The documents had disappeared.
Carlson said the company began a search. It interviewed all employees who touched the envelope. It even searched the plane, trucks, and sorting facility it went through. As of Wednesday night, he says the company has no idea or working theory about what happened to the materials. And the documents are directly relevant to next week's presidential election. Carlson says executives at the shipping company are baffled and deeply bothered by the incident.
U.S. economic output in the third quarter grew by over 33%, in the largest expansion on record. The Commerce Department says the rebound reflects the reopening of the economy and resumption of business activity following lockdowns. That's after the economy fell by just over 31% in the second quarter, in the largest shrinkage on record. Even after recovering a large portion of pandemic-related losses, the economy remains below pre-pandemic levels. A market analyst from Northman Trader noted in a tweet that growth of over 45% was needed to break even. The Commerce Department also noted that disposable personal income fell by just over 13%. It had surged by more than 44% in the second quarter, driven by historic levels of federal stimulus. Outrage over another police shooting has made its way to New York City. Hundreds of people demonstrated in the streets of Brooklyn, and some went on to riot and loot, leading to the arrests of dozens.
Around 200 people dressed in black marched together on the street in response to another police shooting of a black American. Earlier this week, a black man named Walter Wallace Jr. was fatally shot by two police officers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Although it's not clear from the video, reports say he was armed with a knife. Wallace's death is the latest fatal police incident to cause social outrage. Many people label the cases of alleged police brutality as signs of systematic racism in the U.S. and have protested against it. But the protests have almost always been accompanied by some form of violence or vandalism. Last night in Brooklyn, several protesters hurled rocks and bottles at police officers. An American flag was set on fire. One bank was spray painted with explicit language and had one of its glass doors smashed. New York police reported that 30 people were arrested.
The Supreme Court has ruled that absentee ballots in North Carolina can be counted up to 9 days after the election. The ruling is regarded as a victory for Democrats. It means the state's decision to extend the deadline from 3 to 9 days will stay. The ballots will be counted as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. North Carolina Republicans tried on Wednesday to reinstate the 3-day extension. They asked the court twice to block the extended deadline. President Trump's campaign also filed a separate but similar appeal to block the extension. The court rejected the requests without comment. And in Minnesota, the Supreme Court rejected a Republican candidate's emergency application to postpone voting for his congressional district. Republican Tyler Kistner argued that state law requires the postponement because a major party candidate died weeks before the election. The candidate for the Legal Marijuana Now party died unexpectedly in September. The unusual state law was enacted after a prominent Minnesota politician died in a plane crash in 2002, days before the election. The court refused the request without explanation. It means the election between Kistner and incumbent Representative Angie Craig, a Democrat, will go forward. Political pundits say the Democrat will likely benefit from higher voter turnout, and the Republican would have a better chance of winning in a special election with a lower turnout. Immigration and Customs Enforcement unveiled the results of their latest sweep, Operation Granite. The new director says more than 100 illegal immigrants were arrested, with more than 70% of them having criminal records. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
Tony Pham, the newly appointed acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, says they made arrests in Kansas, Michigan, and a number of other states during the 4-day operation.
The men and women of ICE enforcement and removal operations arrested more than 100 removable aliens. More than 70% of those arrested have criminal records that include prior convictions, pending criminal charges, or both.
He says kidnapping of a minor, domestic abuse, and sexual assault are among the list of crimes they committed. According to Pham, nearly a tenth of those arrested were charged with or convicted of domestic abuse. He added that communities are put in danger when police in places known as sanctuary cities ignore ICE's requests after an illegal immigrant is arrested.
Too often, a simple phone call to ICE would have prevented a crime and might have saved a life. When non-cooperative jurisdictions ignore a lawful detainer request and release an alien who is wanted by ICE, public safety is compromised.
The mayor of New York City has defended his sanctuary city policies, which limit how much law enforcement can work with ICE, saying this is about making sure there's a good relationship between immigrants and the police. In other words, he says he doesn't want illegal immigrants to be afraid of calling the police over fears of being deported. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Coming up next, an NYPD officer faced suspension after shouting Trump 2020 from his patrol vehicle. His move and his consequences have garnered voices of support and criticism. Hurricane Zeta, the third storm of its size to hit the U.S. Gulf Coast, is now a tropical storm. That's according to the National Hurricane Center. But damage has already been done in towns and cities where it made landfall in Louisiana. In New Orleans, Zeta dumped torrential rains while strong winds tore roofs off of buildings and knocked over trees. CBS reports one person has died in the aftermath after being electrocuted by a wire. The NHC says the tropical storm is now located over the state of Alabama with maximum sustained winds of 70 miles per hour. Earlier on Wednesday, Zeta slammed the coast as a Category 2 hurricane with 110-mile-per-hour winds. Since making landfall, storm surge warnings have ended for the Mississippi coast and Florida panhandle. Zeta marks the third hurricane to hit the U.S. Gulf Coast this year alone. Despite the deep blue sentiment in California this year, the GOP is optimistic. We spoke with the vice chairman of the California Republican Party and two Republican congressional candidates in California to get their take on the upcoming election.
California has traditionally favored Democratic Party presidential nominees since the 1990s, but the vice chair of the California Republican Party is optimistic that this year, more people in his state will shift towards Trump and the Republican Party.
So this year, we gather a lot more volunteers as we have in the past. 2016 we have, if I say, okay, we're going to have a rally for Donald Trump, maybe 30 people show up, right? But this time, any rally that we call for, easily 100 people will show up. That's a 300% increase.
Kuo also commented on the congressional races this year, pointing to the Republican victory in California's 25th district this March as an indicator of growing support for the party.
In May, when we have a special election for Congress in South, in Orange County, I believe, Mike Garcia has beat out Christy Smith. And that is the first victory that we have, even in California, after the complete wipeout of 2018.
At a pro-Trump event in Redondo Beach, California last weekend, we spoke with James P. Bradley, the Republican candidate running against Democrat incumbent Ted Lieu in California's 33rd congressional district, and Joe Collins, the Republican candidate running against Democrat incumbent Maxine Waters in California's 43rd congressional district. Here's what they had to say about this year's election.
What we've seen in this last 3 months, Beverly Hills, Redondo Beach, throughout the state of California, about recall Newsom, I've seen such a support and an underswell growth of people wanting to turn our great state red again.
It's going to be an exciting election. We have a lot of great candidates that are running for office right now. I think it'll be a good thing to have some balance back in the state of California, get some policies that are actually going to benefit the people instead of take our money through taxes.
Republicans currently control 197 seats in the House, and it has to gain at least 21 additional seats to reach the 218-seat threshold needed for a majority.
We are less than a week out from Election Day, and many have cast their ballots. In Washington state, more than half of the almost 5 million voters have already cast their votes.
As of Tuesday night, 2.5 million ballots in Washington state have been returned. That's over 50%. In 2016, less than 30% of ballots had been returned in the same timeframe. Of the state's 39 counties, 17 have seen returns of more than 50%. 4 counties were even at 60% or higher. In the state's most populous county, King County, over half of voters have returned their ballots. The county had forecasted 90% turnout before ballots were mailed.
We are well on our way to 90% turnout. It continues to be really record-breaking turnout here in King County. At this point, we have about 850,000 ballots in the building, really coming up on 60% already turned.
She added that the workers who process the ballots have started working 10-hour shifts in order to keep up with the workload. The county has also added drop-box ballot pickups to speed ballot processing leading to November 3rd.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has announced that his election fraud unit is investigating an alleged organized election fraud scheme. The elaborate fraud scheme was exposed in a hidden camera investigation by Project Veritas.
Paxton's announcement came several hours after the undercover journalism nonprofit Project Veritas released a collection of undercover videos and phone recordings of a ballot chaser in San Antonio, Texas. The ballot chaser is identified by Project Veritas as Raquel Rodriguez, a political consultant for GOP House candidate Mauro Gaza. In this video, Rodriguez is seen visiting an elderly woman's home to collect her ballot and then influencing the woman to change her vote.
You can vote for whoever you want, but our conversation that we had, you said you were voting for Hager because you were going straight Democrat. So I'm just bringing that to your attention because you could literally change it and put your initials there and you're fine.
Rodriguez then shows the woman how to correct the ballot so it looks like a mistake. And apparently, this is not an isolated incident. Project Veritas also recorded Rodriguez describing an elaborate voter fraud operation involving a network of people working to target thousands of Texan voters. Senior citizens are her primary targets. She details how she convinces them to vote for her candidates, helps them change their votes, and collects and drops off their ballots. The Attorney General said in a statement, "What's shown in the video is shocking and should alarm all Texans who care about election integrity. We are aggressively investigating the serious allegations and potential crimes that Project Veritas documentary audio and video recordings shed light on today." In a new video released today by Project Veritas, Rodriguez claims to be working with both Republican and Democratic candidates. She alleges that candidates running for the Senate, House, City Council, and district courts have paid her thousands of dollars to help get them elected.
When when you do things like this for votes, you're talking between $5 to $8 per vote. I'm just letting you know, so you have an idea. And I'm going to bring $3,500 to the plate, countywide. So I know what I'm bringing to the plate countywide. So that's like $28,000.
Rodriguez also alleged that some Republicans are paying her to get Biden elected. When asked about buying votes for Senate candidate MJ Heger and candidate Biden, here's what she had to say.
The top ticket to get votes for Heger, Biden, how many votes do you think you can deliver for us?
At least 5,000.
And what are we looking at as far as how much that's going to cost?
For the entire team that I'm looking at 55,000.
In another video, Rodriguez said she knows that what she's doing could change the outcome of the state's elections.
5,000 votes could swing the entire state.
Rodriguez has sent a letter to Project Veritas defending her actions. She claims she knew that they were undercover journalists and that she was playing along. Mauro Gaza said in a statement on Facebook that if any member of his campaign team, paid or volunteer, engages in voter fraud, they will be immediately fired and turned over to the county elections office and law enforcement. He said the volunteer in the video no longer serves on his campaign. Grace Coulter, NTD News, New York.
Following a Twitter video, an NYPD police officer is suspended for shouting Trump 2020 from a police vehicle. The Sergeants Benevolent Association, a police union, criticized the NYPD's decision.
A New York Police Department officer was suspended without pay on Sunday. In a video posted on Twitter, the officer repeatedly said Trump 2020 over the speaker.
Trump 2020. Put it on YouTube, put it on Facebook. Trump 2020.
The NYPD says officers cannot take a political stance while on duty. On Twitter, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio condemned the action of the police officer, echoing the NYPD's statement of suspension. The Sergeants Benevolent Association, or SBA, criticized the NYPD's decision in a tweet, stating that the suspension is unnecessary and NYPD officers have a history of making political stances. The tweet included a photo of NYPD Chief of Department Terrence Monahan kneeling with protesters. In the same tweet, the SBA also asked if the consequences are the same for Biden's supporter. President Trump voiced his support for the SBA and the officer in suspension on Twitter. The SBA endorsed President Trump for his support to the police force. On the contrary, New York City Council voted to shift $1 billion away from the police force to social services in July. The mayor says the fund will be redistributed to youth programming and social services to create a fairer city. Since the funding decrease, NYC has seen a sharp increase in gun violence. According to an NYPD report in September, the department saw a 2,500 officer reduction in manpower. Gun arrests are higher than any previous September data since 1994.
The Department of Justice is charging 8 people involved in an illegal Chinese operation. The charges are the first of their kind in the U.S. And more than 80 tons of gold issued by a Chinese jewelry company was found to be fake. An insider told us that the precious metal was smuggled out of China and sold in Hong Kong. The Department of Justice is charging 8 people with conspiring to an illegal agents.
5 of the 8 were arrested on Wednesday. These individuals allegedly took part in an illegal CCP law enforcement operation called Fox Hunt. Operation Fox Hunt began in 2014 under the orders of Xi Jinping. China describes Fox Hunt as an international anti-corruption campaign, but it also targets dissidents of the CCP and tries to coerce or threaten targets into returning to China. These criminal charges are the first of their kind. 5 people were arrested in New Jersey, New York, and California. 3 are still at large. FBI Director Christopher Wray says Fox Hunt is a part of CCP's diverse campaign of theft and malign influence, and that these actions are not isolated incidences.
Charges that will help China understand that surveilling, stalking, harassing, and blackmailing our citizens and lawful permanent residents carries serious risks.
Wray noted that these actions violated international laws and norms. According to the DOJ, one scheme involved New Jersey resident John Doe 1. For 3 years, members of the CCP allegedly ordered people in the U.S. to engage in unsanctioned and illegal behavior, all in attempts to coerce John Doe 1 to return to China. They left menacing notes on the victim's door, imprisoned his sister in China, threatened to harm his other family in China, and harassed his daughter online. According to acting U.S. Attorney Seth Ducharme, one note left for John Doe 1 read, "If you are willing to go back to mainland and spend 10 years in prison, your wife and daughter will be safe and all right. That's the end of this matter." When the Chinese regime couldn't locate one of their fox hunt targets in the U.S., they allegedly sent a representative from China to deliver a threatening message.
Chinese government sent an emissary to visit the victim's family here in the United States. And the message they said to pass on, the target had two options: return to China promptly or commit suicide.
Ray affirmed that the department's concern is not with the Chinese people or Chinese Americans, but with criminal acts committed on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. He said these charges tell China to stay out and that their behavior is not welcome here. The arrested individuals now face the prospect of prison and will be tried in court. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Chinese police punished a man for breaking through the regime's internet censorship wall. Netizens say there could be unusual tricks behind police surveillance tools. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more on the story.
Now we look to China's internet surveillance. A man from northeast China was penalized for bypassing China's censorship firewall. That's after police found him using special software to browse websites blocked by the regime. Chinese citizens can only visit websites Beijing approves of. Its firewall blocks tens of thousands of websites that the regime considers sensitive, including YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. To access blocked websites, Chinese internet users have to use special apps or virtual private network services known as VPNs. But these apps could expose them to surveillance risks. One Twitter user claims that a large number of Chinese VPNs are developed by the internet police. She alleged the purpose is to make it easier for police to track the rule breakers, especially those who gained influence online. NTD can't independently verify her claims. Among those influential users is citizen journalist Fang Bing. He lives in Wuhan, the center of China's virus pandemic. This February, he posted videos of bodies inside Wuhan hospitals on his YouTube channel. He later went missing and his whereabouts are still unknown. VPNs owned by Chinese companies do have the potential to expose users to regime censorship. Under Chinese law, all companies must hand over user data if regime officials request it, though there are exceptions.
VPN software that is heavily blocked in China should be on the safer side.
Leo is referring to software that's blocked even more strongly than usual by the regime, called UltraSurf and FreeGate. He's been using them to circumvent China's internet censorship for over a decade. What sets these two apart is that they're developed by members of a spiritual group. In the early 2000s, a group of overseas adherents of Falun Gong developed the software together. It was an effort to break the Chinese regime's internet censorship. Falun Gong is a spiritual meditation practice that's been heavily persecuted in China for over 2 decades. But UltraSurf and FreeGate users are not limited to Chinese netizens. Their users have expanded to countries like Iran, Egypt, and Syria, countries where government officials model China in terms of internet control. Now we turn to China's defense law. Amid the rising tensions between the U.S. and China, Beijing authorities are considering updating the country's national defense law. One of the most notable additions is raising concerns. It outlines premises that would allow China to mobilize resources in preparation for war. Under the revision, if China's so-called development interest came under threat, the country could mobilize the entire nation against it. Chinese authorities remain vague about how it defines development interest. It's unclear if actions like the U.S. imposing sanctions against Chinese companies would fall into that category. Now we take a look at a poll from Taiwan. In recent months, China has ramped up its intimidation tactics against Taiwan, repeatedly performing military drills nearby the island. That's as concerns about possible wars in the Taiwan Strait have surged. A recent poll conducted by the Taiwan International Strategic Association shows if the Chinese regime did send troops to attack Taiwan, nearly 80% of Taiwanese people are willing to fight. According to the data, more than half of the island's population believe the United States will send troops to help defend Taiwan, while nearly 1/3 say the U.S. will not. But the war is not the first choice for many. The survey showed that more than half of Taiwanese people polled say the current status quo with China should be maintained. About 25% responded that relations with China should be repaired, while only around 13% agree that Taiwan should be independent. China's territory is 270 times larger than Taiwan's. Beijing's communist regime claims Taiwan as its own territory, something the democratic island denies.
Earlier this year, more than 80 tons of gold issued by a Chinese jewelry company was found to be fake. Regulators have yet to explain why. An insider told us that the gold was smuggled out of China and sold in Hong Kong. They said they were one of the operation's middlemen.
In order to secure loans, Chinese jewelry company King Gold Jewelry issued 83 tons of gold to moneylenders and trust banks. That amounts to 22% of China's annual gold production. The problem is, the gold, valued $4.2 billion, was found to be fake. Earlier this year, Chinese media reported that they are actually gilded copper. The company's stock plummeted nearly 30% on Nasdaq. It later voluntarily delisted its shares. To this day, Chinese regulators have not said where the genuine gold is, if it exists. But one person claims he knows the answer. Yi Qiwei is a member of China's so-called red aristocracy. He's from the Manchu ethnic minority. His father was a senior communist official, and his grandfather was a communist revolutionary who helped the regime seize power. The insider said the real gold was actually stolen from the Chinese institutions and sold in Hong Kong. He knows because he is one of the middlemen. Last October, he heard from his connections that there were gold from mainland China cheaper than the market price.
Every day it would come in from the Chinese city of Shenzhen. We would go buy it every day, 10 kilos, 20 kilos, 30 kilos, and then sell it in the afternoon on the same day. We made money from the price differences. We didn't know where the gold came from.
Messages show the seller telling him the gold was from Chinese governmental sources. When Yi became suspicious of the amount and authenticity of the cheap gold, another contact told him it was actually stolen from China, but the person quickly deleted the message. After the media reported on the Chinese jewelry company's fake gold scandal, he was convinced that the gold bars he bought and sold were the same batch. That's because the numbers printed on them match the range of numbers printed on the Chinese company's gold bars. He said nearly all major organized crime groups or triads in Hong Kong were involved in the gold laundering.
The people in mainland China first swapped the gold bars with fake ones. They smuggled them out, and then the gangs here in Hong Kong were responsible for contacting buyers for them, and then transporting them. All the buyers they found were big foreign investors, not Chinese ones. That's because there was a problem with one person in China buying gold in large quantities. So they were looking for foreign buyers, those from the US, Europe, and Japan.
He said people being investigated for the scandal now are just scapegoats.
This is not something one or two people can do. The money involved is about $1 billion, and the amount I got involved with is just the tip of the iceberg.
The fake gold was discovered in February, but no media nor Chinese regulators spoke a word about it until June. It remains a mystery what type of powerful force in China was able to smuggle such a huge amount of gold out of China, giving order to Hong Kong crime groups and keeping Chinese media and regulators silent for so long.
Till this day, nobody knows where the gold is. That's why I want to say that the Chinese system is rotten to its roots.
Yi said he has benefited from the CCP system, enjoying a wealthy life and meeting people like Bill Clinton. But he realized no one can stay secure for long under the system. Reporting by Xiaohua Gu and Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Up next, the Germans are pioneering new levels of advanced driver assistance systems. Mercedes is working on its driver pilot, which has level 3 automation. The U.S. government will pay Eli Lilly $375 million to secure 300,000 vials of a CCP virus antibody drug. The drug is still pending emergency approval by the FDA. Eli Lilly says it expects to manufacture 1 million doses of the drug by the end of the year. The drug will be used in antibody treatment for high-risk virus patients. If the FDA grants an emergency use authorization, patients in the U.S. will not have to pay for the medicine. Taiwan's United Microelectronics Corp. Has pleaded guilty to trade secret theft in the United States. The company will have to pay a $60 million fine. The Taiwanese company was accused of helping a Chinese state-owned chipmaker steal secrets from Micron Technology. It's the second largest fine ever in a criminal trade secret prosecution. UMC, a Chinese company, and 3 individuals were indicted in 2018 for conspiracy to steal trade secrets from Micron. UMC said in a statement that its management was unaware of and did not authorize actions taken by 3 of its employees who had previously worked for Micron. France's LVMH will pay slightly less to acquire U.S. jeweler Tiffany & Company than initially expected. The 2 companies agreed to end a bitter dispute and salvage the luxury sector's biggest ever deal. The new takeover price was set at $131.50 a share, down from $135 in the original deal. That will bring the total price tag to almost $16 billion. It represents an overall discount of almost $500 million for LVMH. Other key terms of the deal, initially agreed last November, remain unchanged. The transaction is expected to close in early 2021. The new deal brings an end to a public war of words between 2 of the luxury industry's best-known groups. Tesla touts the cutting-edge nature of its new full self-driving software. Rival Mercedes-Benz says it has developed a similar system, but doesn't allow members of the public to take it on urban roads.
The Germans are pioneering new levels of advanced driver assistance systems. They're taking a step-by-step approach to releasing new technology. They wait for their own engineers to validate their system rather than the general public. This is why Mercedes is trying to gain global approval for its Drive Pilot system, which has Level 3 automation. Level 3 means drivers can legally take their eyes off the wheel and the company would be liable, depending on the jurisdiction.
And as you can see, I don't have any responsibility to move through this traffic jam situation. The only thing I have to be is responsive in case the system alerts me and brings me back into the driving.
He added that if the driver would have to take over manually again, the car would indicate that on the central screen. After the indication appears, the driver has 10 seconds to take over. The car also detects emergency vehicles by the sound of their sirens and their flashing lights. If such a car appears, the driver has to take control.
The vehicle detects this emergency vehicle. I take over by grasping the steering wheel, looking out the windshield, and I'm back in manual mode.
He added that this feature is built in to obey traffic law. The Mercedes Driver Pilot will function only on highways in Germany from mid-next year onward if a new law is passed.
Up next, a boat carrying migrants capsized while crossing the English Channel, leaving 2 adults and 2 children dead. This is thought to be the biggest loss of life during the current migrant crisis. And Belgium is proud of its chocolate heritage, and now a Belgian chocolatier is crowned the world's best pastry chef. That and more when we return. Over to Europe. In recent years, boats of migrants have arrived in the UK by crossing the English Channel. But conditions on the channel are dangerous and 4 people have just lost their lives. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more news from Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to the UK newsroom with UK and European news. 2 adults and 2 children are dead after a boat carrying about 20 migrants capsized off the coast in northern France. Another 15 people were rescued and hospitalised. The Deputy Prefect of Dunkirk says they do not know the cause of the incident yet. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson shared condolences on Twitter for what he calls is a terrible incident and promised to crack down on criminal human trafficking gangs. Several thousand migrants have attempted the dangerous crossing of the Channel this year, often paying traffickers to help them. Britain has repeatedly pressed President Emmanuel Macron's government to do more to prevent the migrants leaving France. Belarus basketball star Yelena Levchenko was jailed for taking part in street demonstrations against President Alexander Lukashenko. She says she has no regrets.
Levchenko has twice represented her country at the Olympic Games and played seasons in the US Women's National Basketball Association. But until this year, she had always stayed out of politics. That changed abruptly when her country was engulfed by protests.
On the one hand, I could have just closed my eyes to this, move away and live comfortably, but I cannot.
Released after 15 days, she added her name to an open letter of protest signed by nearly 1,000 Belarus sports figures.
I want us to be free in a new Belarus, where we can freely express our opinions.
Reflecting on her ordeal, Levchenko says she feels sorry for the authorities, believing demonstrators are much more free than them.
In France, chefs and restaurant owners warn many of them could close their business. They say the new restrictions could strike a fatal blow to the whole profession. Our France correspondent David Vivez has the details.
Oyster swimming in ice. Years after its creation, French chef Guy Savoy's passion to prepare this dish remains the same. From 8 a.m. to 11 p.m, the 3 Michelin star chef and his team prepare menus for his prestigious restaurant à la Monnaie de Paris.
Working in the kitchen, welcoming the guests, preparing meals for them. This is something magic to me. It's almost an addiction.
But for restaurants and bars, the total lockdown from March to June, followed by restrictions and a curfew, come at a price. Savoy, along with 37 chefs and restaurant owners, sent a letter to French President Emmanuel Macron. He asked the president to ease the measures on restaurants. According to Savoy and other chefs, 1 out of 2 restaurants may be forced to close by the end of the year.
There is no money, no revenue, but the rent goes on, as well as bills to all collaborators we work with.
For his part, Savoy says he hasn't paid himself a salary since March. The French government imposed a curfew on October 17th, aiming at limiting social interactions in the evening, especially in restaurants and bars. Some chefs spoke of their bitterness of being forced to close, as they respected all restrictions imposed until now. They say there's no proof of the role of restaurants in the transmission of the virus. But Savoy is optimistic.
The restaurant is a crossroad of human interactions. It's just between customers and the many producers, and we arrange their meeting in our restaurant. I tell you, even if there are only 20 customers in my restaurant, for me, I'm happy to do my job and be a part of their life.
Restaurants in France are known to represent a way of life, but it's also at the centre of its economy. With the drop in tourism and new restrictions coming in Thursday, October 29th, the future seems bleak for some of them. Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
A Belgian chocolatier is crowned the world's best pastry chef by a jury of independent reporters.
Pierre Marcolini won the award in a competition organised by World Pastry Stars, an Italian-based organisation of chefs.
To all those who have followed me in a completely crazy project aimed at innovating, transforming, changing, modernizing the world of pastry and the world of chocolate, today the reward is here.
He puts the secret to Belgium's excellence in chocolate down to mechanisation at the beginning of the 20th century.
They discovered quite quickly that the more you crush a cocoa bean, it was considered a spice at the beginning, the more the bean will release aromas.
Pierre sees value in what he produces in what he calls a gloomy period.
I think the best thing you can do is to end up at home with a bar of chocolate, a box of pralines and a box of chocolates. It is comforting. It gives pleasure and it brings happiness.
Marcolini's chocolates have become luxury gifts, with some boxes selling for almost $120. Belgium is proud of its chocolate heritage. It has over 2,000 chocolate stores and museums, tours and workshops.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Back to New York.
Pastry chefs from around the globe are competing in the best panettone in the world competition. The traditional Italian sweetbread is popular around Christmas time. Pastry chefs from around the world have been competing in Italy for the title of Best Panettone Maker. The traditional sweetbread is a popular treat around Christmas time.
Pastry chefs have gathered to find out who makes the tastiest traditional Italian sweetbread. Welcome to the Best Panettone in the World Championship. A panel of judges has been smelling, nibbling, and rating their entries behind closed doors.
What we look for in a classic panettone is based on several criteria, from color and cut to the baking and flavor, where you can detect the noble ingredients used by the pastry chef.
They have the tough job of choosing between 300 competitors. These experts are considering 3 categories: innovative, decorative, and classic. The judges are members of the International Federation of Pastry Chefs, Gelato Makers, and Chocolatiers. While 80% of the contestants are from Italy, entries are accepted from all over the world. Among the countries represented are Spain, Brazil, Japan, China, and the United States.
I don't see myself as a judge, but also as a peer, because in reality we are all colleagues.
Innovative panettones are draped with everything from ginger and nuts to spicy chocolate and rum. However, in the classic category, chefs must stick to the traditional flavors: almonds, raisins, and candied citrus. The event is meant to draw enthusiasts to panettone making. For the champions, the award opens a path to fame and recognition in the pastry world.
And that's all for now. Catch us again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Jasmina Davis.
This November 3rd, one of the most hotly contested elections in U.S. history. An unprecedented White House race. Who will lead the nation?
Jobs and companies are coming back to our country like never before. He will shut it down again. He will destroy this country.
It's time to stand up, take back our country.
The president has no plan.
Tune into NTD on November 3rd for live coverage and results.